microphone? Just checking. Is it?
Hello everyone, my name is Onjali Test and I'm the author of The Night Bus Hero.
Can we stop it?
Yeah.
We're just getting a bit of...
Is it ruffling?
It's against the pearls.
Oh, okay.
The pearls, so.
I'm just going to give it to you, man.
Yeah.
So let's move it so the pearls make it straight.
So yeah, when this is done, that should just be kind of like saved as a video on the channel. So that you can look back and review that, but it will stay as unlisted. Unless you share them the link. Cool. I think Jeff needs to go again whenever you're ready.
Great. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No, it's fine, thank you so much. Right. Hello everyone, my name is Onjali Test and I am the author of The Night Bus Hero. Now, I'm going to be taking you right back in time to the moment when I think this story really began. For those of you who have read The Night Bus Hero, you'll know that it's about a homeless man called Thomas and a very interesting narrator who was actually a bully. And I want to talk to you about some of the inspirations and some of the moments in my life that led to the writing of this story. So if I go right back in time to when I was 14, this is me at the age of 14, I had a massive fringe, big glasses, and I was extraordinarily shy. Unless someone was my friend, I just couldn't speak to them. And when I was this age, I used to take the longest route that I could to get to school. My school was actually only 5 minutes away, but I would take a 45-minute journey to pick up all my friends so that we could go to school together. And on that journey, I would pass by an old police station. Now this is East Ham Police Station. It's still, the building is still there, but it's no longer a police station today. But when I was 14, it was an active police station. And one day I was walking by and I saw someone sleeping by the steps, covered in newspapers and old blankets, I've forgotten my stream, and a trolley. There was a trolley parked nearby him. Now, this was the first time that I saw someone really old who was homeless sleeping in my town. I live in London, so of course I see lots of homeless people all across the city, but this was the first time I saw someone in my town. And not only that, but someone who was old enough to be like a friend of my granddad's, and it really worried me. Now, I was too shy to speak to him or do anything, so what I would do is I'd pass him by underneath my massive fringe, just staring at him and looking at him as I walked to go and get my friends from their homes to go to school. And I'm going to show you, oh sorry, is that the wrong way? If I go back. Oh, the slides are the wrong way. The old man is meant to be before.
Okay, here,
yeah.
Sorry, yeah, that's the next one. Oh, sorry.
Is that the right order though?
The order I've got is...
No, that's the wrong
and
order.
then the
Okay,
lunch.
sorry, that's my fault. So the old man used to come before the lunch thing. Okay, so this is a picture of not the old man that I saw sleeping by the police station, but a picture of an actor called Anthony Hopkins, and he's playing a homeless man in a film. But I saw this picture in the newspaper and I cut it out and I kept it because he looked so much like the old man that I saw sleeping on the steps of that police station. He had a huge baggy coat that was slightly dirty. He had a hat, but not as fancy as that one. The old man that I saw had a woolly hat and he had a rough white beard. And he also had a trolley that looked exactly like the trolley in this picture, filled with plastic bags and all kinds of things that we would regard as rubbish, but which this man collected. Now, I was too shy to speak to this man, as I said, so I spent about 2 weeks walking past him beneath my fringe, just staring out at him. And one day, I think he must have thought it very weird to have a slightly strange-looking girl in her school uniform looking at him, so he waved at me and he gave me a smile. And I thought, oh, okay, he seems nice, maybe I can do something to help. But I didn't really know how to help, so I thought of one way that I could possibly help him, and that was to collect things from my packed lunch. So every day at school, I'd get all my friends to give me things that they didn't want from their packed lunch boxes, like bananas and crisps. And I'd collect things that, I didn't want from my lunch box or that I wanted to save just for him. And I also started collecting my pocket money and saving that up so I could buy him a portion of chips or a hot chocolate, anything to keep him warm on the colder days. And I'd give those to him. And I would literally, because I was too shy to speak to him, I'd run up to him, drop those things in his hands, he'd give me a wave or a thumbs up, and then I'd run away again without saying anything really. And that went on for a couple of years. I was very, very shy, and it went on until I went to college. Now I was really lucky because my bus stop to college was just by the police station, so I saw him not only in the mornings but in the evenings too. I continued doing those things. I continued to give him food and anything that I could afford to give him during that time. But one day, on my way to college, I noticed that he wasn't there. His blankets were all gone, his cardboard bed that he slept on was gone, his trolley was also gone, and he wasn't there the next day or the next day either. And suddenly I began to really feel worried about him. I began to wonder where he'd gone and if he was safe. And after about 3 or 4 days of my worrying, I managed to muster up the courage and go into the police station and ask the police officer there, excuse me sir, but have you seen the old man that sleeps by the steps? Now, the answer that I got really shook my world, and it kind of revolutionised the way that I saw things and what I wanted to do in reaction to what I was about to hear. Because the police officer looked at me and said, "We're really sorry, but he died a few nights ago." And I wanted to know his name because I hadn't even had the courage to ask this old man his name. And I asked the police officer, "Do you know what his name was then?" And the police officer said, "Well, we don't really know, but everyone called him Thomas." Everyone called him Thomas. So this lovely old man who never really did anything except wander the streets with his trolley and give people waves and smiles had died in my town on the streets without anyone even really knowing his name. And I felt really angry and I felt really devastated. I was angry at myself that I hadn't really found out his story, that I hadn't had the courage to ask him the questions that I wanted to ask. And I realised that I wanted to do something about it and try and help other people that might be like him and needing a little bit of help. So I began to volunteer, literally a few weeks after this happened, with a homeless shelter that my mum worked at. And then I began to work in other homeless shelters and soup kitchens and began to volunteer my time. And through those amazing organisations and through meeting other amazing people, just like the person called Thomas, I began to meet refugees and also women who were fleeing domestic violence. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning the fact that I was meeting refugees and women fleeing violence is because if it wasn't for Thomas, I don't think I would have met them. And if I hadn't met them, I would never have written The Boy at the Back of the Class. So The Boy at the Back of the Class is about another form of homelessness, a very extreme form of homelessness. It's about becoming a refugee. Now, a refugee isn't just homeless, as in they might be sleeping on the streets. They might have lost not just a home, but they might have lost their town or their city or even their country. So they are an extreme form of homelessness. And I would never have written The Boy at the Back of the Class if I hadn't met refugees in the homeless shelters that I was working for, and I hadn't decided to go out into the refugee camps. And similarly, I would never have written The Star Outside My Window, which was my second book, about a child fleeing a really sad situation at home and trying to find their mum, trying to find the spirit of their mum, which is what The Star Outside My Window is about. And as a result of my working with refugees and women fleeing violence, I managed to create 2 charities as well. And I rate Thomas for that. I really loved the fact that that's Thomas's legacy in my mind. And The Night Bus Hero, I think in many ways might have been the first book I should have written, but Thomas's legacy has come out as the 3rd book. Now, going back to the book and the creation of the book and all the inspirations behind it. Now, this book was written in lockdown, so The Night Bus Hero was actually really tricky for me to write. But I knew before I started writing it that I wanted a few elements, because before I write a story, I'm not really a planner, but before I write a story, I have some idea of what I want it to be about, the kind of issue that I want to deal with. I knew that there had to be a night bus in it because I live in London, and when I'm working really, really late, I sometimes take the night buses home. And when I take the night buses home, I notice a lot of people sleeping rough. They're sleeping in the buses, usually at the back, covered in their coats, because buses are usually the only warm place that a lot of homeless people can find to stay safe and warm in. So I knew I wanted the night bus to be like a feature, almost a character in its own right. I also knew that I wanted there to be, sorry, next slide, I can't remember what the next one was. So tricky for you. Oh, okay, maps.
So I've got the Night Bus Hero.
Yeah, and then that's the night, yeah, so people sleeping rough on the buses, and then the next one is, yeah. And I also knew that not only did I want the night bus to be actually featured in the book as a title as well, but also I wanted maps to be in it. Now, I don't know about you, but I love maps, and I think bus maps and train maps are actually creations of genius, because you have to take a whole area, take a billion different routes that could lead to all parts of a city or even a town or even a country even, and put them into one picture that everyone understands. And this is the bus map that I use to plan the adventure that happens in the book. So I get very excited by maps, and whenever I go to a town or city, I'm always on the hunt to see what kind of maps they have around their town and city. So I knew that there was going to be an adventure that took us all across London, which is where I live. I also knew that Thomas, my Thomas, the Thomas that I saw sleeping at the bottom of those police steps, was going to be a central character in the book. I did wonder whether or not I was going to call him Thomas, but I knew that I wanted it to be Thomas, my Thomas. So the story is also an imagining of a kind of adventure that I might go on if Thomas, if I'd had enough courage to speak to Thomas and go on an adventure with him. And I also knew that there was going to be a series. Thank you. I also knew there's going to be a series of thefts. I wanted some really, really interesting robbers to be part of this story. Now, these robbers don't just steal things that you and I might want to steal if we ever did want to steal anything, like jewels or, the crown or anything like that. They steal quite weird, strange things, such as Paddington Bear's statue from Paddington Station. Because I thought, wouldn't it be funny if we had a series of robberies which didn't really make sense? But in the book, the robbers steal these things to do one very crucial thing, which is to put blame on homeless communities. And we'll often find when things go wrong in the world, there's always someone that we want to blame and someone that is blamed, a community that is blamed. So I wanted these robbers to be very strange, very weird, and to steal statues like Paddington Bear statue in Paddington Station in London. I also knew that there was going to be a lot of buses, of course, but I didn't really know what kind of buses or what kind of routes that I was going to follow. But I collect buses. I love collecting things. If you ever met any member of my family, they'd tell you that I'd need a whole house for things that I collect that were separate to mine. But I have all of these buses lying around, and I was trying to think of ideas for the book, because I was writing it in lockdown. I was looking around my room and I saw my little buses, and I saw the destinations that they have, like Trafalgar Square and Paddington. So they also inspired me. So if you are a writer or a songwriter or a poet or whatever form of storytelling you love doing, just look around your room, you might pick up some inspirations. I also knew that I wanted to put some famous locations in the book. So I live in London. London's kind of like my home turf. And of course, in the map that I showed you just now, there are lots of key locations that people from all around the world come to visit, like Piccadilly Circus and Trafalgar Square and Buckingham Palace. And I knew that I wanted to include some of them because by putting in places that are really famous, even if you've never been to London, it's likely that you'll know what these places look like. So there's a familiarity there. So I wanted to include them. And one particular very very famous icon that I want to include was the statue of supposedly Eros, which stands guard above the fountain in Piccadilly Circus. But is it Eros? You'll have to read the book to find out, because we find a truth there. I also knew right away, even before I thought of any of those ideas, that there was going to be a bus, that there was going to be robberies, that there was going to be famous places in it. I knew right away from the very beginning that the narrator would be a bully called Hector. Now, there's two reasons why I wanted a bully called Hector. Number one, why did I want a bully? Well, I find that no matter what form of homelessness anyone is experiencing in the world, whether they're refugees or whether they're women and children fleeing violence or whether they're homeless people sleeping on the streets, all of them have something in common, and that is they are often bullied by people who are not very nice and who will take advantage of their vulnerabilities. And I think that's really, really wrong. And I thought, wouldn't it be really interesting if the narrator of this story was a bully, and to see what his relationship with someone that he's bullied, someone he doesn't like very much, might be like. And also, when I was growing up and I saw Thomas sleeping at the bottom of those police steps, there were other kids in my school that saw him too but weren't very nice and called him names. And I always wondered, why do they do that? How can anyone want to bully a homeless person? So I really want to explore that idea. And I also thought it would be really funny to have a bully with a really grandiose name like Hector. Now, for those of you who might study and love Roman and Greek mythology, you'll know that Hector is a Trojan prince. He is known in the mythologies for being a really wonderful warrior who protects his home, protects his people, but ironically doesn't like war. He actually doesn't like going to war because he wants to protect everyone. So I thought, wouldn't it be really funny to have a bully called Hector, this horrible person with a really amazing heroic name, traversing and telling our story for us. So I knew all of those things were going to be in the book, and that the narrator would be a bully. Now, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to show you just kind of character Hector really is. And we're going to read, if you've got the book in front of you, it's from page 20. So we're going to meet Hector having a really bad day at school and wanting to show off to his friends who are kind of laughing and giggling at him. And at that moment, he sees Thomas, the homeless man, sitting on a bench and comes up with an idea. We reached the top of the hill where an old bench stood beneath the oak trees, and that's when I spotted him, the old man. I'd seen him there before, lots of times, sitting on the bench next to a trolley piled high with rubbish. He was in his usual long old crumply black coat that looked as if it had been pulled out from a bin, and was wearing the bright yellow woolly hat he always had on his head, even in summer. And without even trying, I had the most genius idea that had ever been born. In fact, it was so genius and so out of the box and so unexpected that I knew it would be enough to make Will and Katie, my two best friends, shut up once and for all. I stopped walking, which made Will and Katie automatically stop too. Will looked at me blankly, but Katie's eyebrows immediately jumped up as if to say, "Yeah, and what?" "Want to have some fun?" I asked. Will nodded, a smile breaking across his face and making him look like a hungry fox. "See that old man there?" I asked, pointing towards the bench. "You mean the old trolley man?" asked Katie. "We're going to let him know he's not allowed here anymore." "How?" whispered Katie, leaning in towards me. She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. I waited for a few seconds to keep them guessing, and then whispered back, "I'm going to take his hat." "His hat?" asked Will. "Yeah. He's always wearing that gross, stinky hat." Katie finally smiled, which meant she thought my idea was cool. "Come on," I said. "Let's go." And of course, you're going to have to read on if you're not ready yet to find out if their plan works. So as you can see, Hector's not a very nice person, but his interaction with Thomas, which begins off in a kind of really horrible way with this horrible attempt to take something that's precious to him, leads to all kinds of adventures. Now, one of the other locations in my book is a very fancy place called Fortnum&Mason. Now, if you've not heard of Fortnum&Mason, if you ever travel down from Newcastle and surrounding regions and come down to London, ask for Fortnum&Mason. It's a very fancy supermarket, kind of like a supermarket near Green Park, which isn't too far from Buckingham Palace. And the reason why it's not too far from Buckingham Palace is because the Queen gets all her groceries from it. So it's a very fancy, wonderful place with chandeliers and honey and jam, and people from all over the world come to Fortnum&Mason to buy their honey and jams and take them home as gifts. Now, the reason why I wanted this location in the book is because it symbolises really very a wealthy world where we're not thinking about homelessness, we're not thinking about anything to do with anyone suffering. But just around the corner, I always tell my friends, whenever they come in to town and want to go to Fortnum and Mason, whenever they visit me from abroad and go to Fortnum and Mason, I say, look, just take a few steps away, go around a corner, and I promise you, you will see a whole other world. And that other world is usually lots of homeless people leaving their things behind or sitting and waiting for someone to try and help them if possible. So there is a juxtaposition there between wealth and poverty, and they live literally side by side. And sometimes you will see homeless people in front of Fortnum and Masons asking for help or selling the big issue. Now, one of the other places that is in the book is a place that is one of my favourite places in London. It is the St Paul's Cathedral, and the reason why I love St Paul's Cathedral, other than it being really beautiful, is that it has an amazing legacy of helping local communities and local homeless peoples. And even the architect, Christopher Wren, had an amazing legacy of wanting to create equality between people, between the rich and the poor. So this amazing building has a very important part to play in the adventure for Hector and Thomas. So read on to find out why that's so. Now, one of the other things that I wanted to include in the book was a character, a homeless character who had an affinity with animals. Because when I was your age and I was, wandering through town, I'd often see, especially bigger shoe sellers or homeless people with dogs. And I always wondered, why is it that homeless people have dogs and animals around them? If they're struggling to live and survive, how is it that they're able to afford to feed their pets, to feed their dogs and cats? And it's a question that was answered for me when I began works in homeless shelters. And of course, if anyone is, made to suffer homelessness, one of the key characteristics they have to bear is being incredibly lonely. A homeless person can sit on a street and watch thousands of people passing them by every single day and never have even a single person looking over to give them a smile or to ask, how are you? And it can be incredibly lonely, and they are human beings. They need love. They want to love. So having a pet is one of the most crucial elements to ensuring that they feel as if they're seen, as if they matter. So it's really important. Pets are really important to homeless peoples. And I always get really happy when I see anyone with a dog or another kind of pet, because I know that they're not alone. Now, I knew that I wanted to have someone in the book that was homeless and had a pet and affinity with animals. And I have a brother who's 2 years younger, and he leaves comic books strewn all over the house whenever he, comes home. And one of the comic books that he'd left one day while I was writing the story was Catwoman, which anyone who's a Batman fan will know about. And I thought, oh my God, wouldn't it be so cool to have a Catwoman in the book? So there is a Catwoman in the book, and she's very important as well. So I hope you go and read all about her. Now, as with all my books, all my books are geared towards helping phenomenal people and highlighting their stories as much as possible. So if you go to the back of the Night Bus Hero, you're going to learn about lots of wonderful characters, but in particular two that I want to very quickly share with you right now. So the first is Lorraine Tabone, this wonderful woman here. She's holding up her jacket to her organisation. Now, Lorraine, up until 5.5 years ago, was pretty much like you and I. She would go about her work, go about her day, not really thinking about anything. But one day, she was going home from work, crossing a shopping centre, and she saw a pile of blankets by a shop, a closed shop. She thought, oh, that's strange, it's moving. So she waited to see what was going to come out. And she was absolutely horrified to see that it was a young woman who looked very, very sick, had clearly been homeless for a very long time. So Lorraine, being a wonderful person, went over and asked her if there was anything that she could do to help. And the young woman said, yes, I need, if you could get me some warm clothes and maybe a hot drink, that'd be wonderful. So Lorraine did those things and then promised, I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'll bring some other things. Are there any more homeless people in the shopping centre? And the young lady said, yes, there's lots and lots, I can show you them. So Lorraine didn't just come back with a bag just for this woman. She brought back 30 cars with 44 friends, packed, each one packed with all kinds of donations, literally donated overnight. And she spent the whole day, whole 2 days, giving those things out and meeting every homeless person in that area. 5.5 years later, she is still working with every single homeless person, not just in my area, but the whole borough. She knows all of their stories, and she is absolutely phenomenal. And she's doing this on her own from her little garage just outside her flat, with an incredible army of volunteers. So she's absolutely brilliant. And I think people like her need to be on the news a little bit more. We need to know about wonderful souls like her. And the next is Dan Atkins. Now, Dan is a pretty incredibly incredible person. Dan is an engineer. He works to fix buses and coaches. And one day after work, he was grabbing his bags from the garage and was about to leave when he saw someone in the corner of the garage. And when he went over to find out who it was, he found out it was his friend, his actual colleague, one of his colleagues. And he asked, what's going on here? Why do you have a sleeping bag here? What's happening? And his friend said, my landlord put my rent up too high. I couldn't afford to stay on. So I'm actually sleeping in the garage until I can get my life back on track. Now, Dan, being rather exceptional, didn't just, offer his sofa to his friend or go and, get enough money out for a hotel room for a night. He went out, got his life savings and brought an old bus from one of the bosses that he worked for, and he transformed that bus into a shelter. And since then, he has been buying up old buses and making them into homeless shelters and training shelters and therapy centres for homeless people, and using them as addresses so that homeless people can apply for housing, can get new jobs and get on with their lives. He's absolutely fantastic, and Buses for Homeless is one of the charities that you'll be helping if you read or buy The Night Bus Hero, so thank you for that. So pretty much wherever I look, whenever I'm going, traveling across the country, if I was coming up to Newcastle to see you today, I would definitely be trying to find out about local charities in the vicinity of your schools, because there are incredible people everywhere who are running soup kitchens and doing all kinds of things and activities to try and ensure that homeless people are not only helped but listened to and actually helped in a way that they want to be helped. So it's really, really important that you know about those local charities, because they are everywhere. And if you ever want to volunteer and ever want to get your hands stuck in and want to help a future Thomas in some way, then there is a whole world of them waiting for you to go and do just that. Now, I really hope that all my books, whatever books you might read or might not read, I hope all books in some way inspire you to realise your power, to realise your strength, and the fact that actually we can change the world by changing one person's world at a time. I see people doing that all the time. So everything really begins with you. All the change in the world, all the good in the world begins with you. And I'm really hoping that if any of you read The Night Bus Hero or The Boy at the Back of the Class or The Star Outside My Window, whatever you might read, there's a whole world of other books out there, of course, that are also tapping into those issues. I really hope you recognise the power that you hold to make this world a better place. So thank you so much for listening to me. I know it's been a long time to listen to someone, but I'm really hoping that for any writers and any activists out there, that the books that I write and the stories that I get to tell and the people that I get to talk about inspire you to go on and make the change that we need in the world.